Welcome to Newtonian. So today what we're going to be learning about is the chapter biological molecules. And one of the first things that really comes up in biological molecules are ions. So now, previously we've learned that ions essentially is something that's charged. So that could be, for example, something like sodium. So you've got Na, and that could be Na+. So that charge is what makes it be called an ion. Now at A-level biology, there's two terms that you need to know with regards to ions. Well, the first term that you need to know is a cation. Now, what exactly is a cation? Well, a cation is essentially a positively charged ion. Okay. We'll come to examples later, but what I need you guys to remember is a cation is a positively charged ion. Now, what's the other one then? Well, the other one essentially is known as an anion. Now, to define an anion, it's essentially a negatively charged ion. Okay. Right. Brilliant. So we know that there's two types of ions. There's an anion and there's a cation. Okay. A cation is a positively charged ion, whereas an anion is a negatively charged ion. Perfect. Now let's relate this into biology. So, what are some of the main cations? Okay, so let's learn about cations first. Okay. Cations in biology. Now, the cations I'll be covering are mainly for OCR, so I'll put them in brackets for OCR. I'd really recommend you to check your specification and just check which ions you need to know about. But still, these should be very helpful because these just keep repeating, and you can find questions that are on the lines of, okay, tell us the function of cations in your body with examples, or tell us the function of ions in your body with examples, and that can even go up to 6 markers. So there are a lot of marks available from just a simple concept, okay? So I don't want you guys to brush this off, okay, because you can get a lot of marks from this. So, what's the first cation we want to learn about? Well, the first one that I want to talk about is something we've been talking about since we're kids, right? It's known as calcium. Now for calcium specifically, the ion we want to talk about is Ca2+. Now Ca2+ is quite interesting because usually as kids we've been talking about milk and calcium for bones. But at A-level, what we want to delve more into with regards to calcium, and I know this might seem a bit weird right now because you guys haven't covered the nervous system, but once you cover the nervous system, this should make so much more sense, right? But because you still need to know the functions, this is it essentially. So for now, you can almost, if I may say, memorize it, but later on it'll make more sense to you, okay? But just tag along with me, right? I want you guys to understand as much as you can from this, okay? So with calcium, what's the functionality of calcium in our body? Well, the functionality of calcium in our body is a nervous transmission, so nerve impulses transmission. So, all right, nerve impulse transmission. Now it helps with nerve impulse transmissions. So like, okay, one second, hang on. Fine, we'll agree that that's how nerve impulses are transmitted, but what does it do? Well, what you've learned already in chapter 1 is there's something known as exocytosis, right? So essentially what Ca2+ does is it helps exocytosis to occur. It stimulates exocytosis to occur. For those who aren't that sure with exocytosis, it's essentially when you take something from inside of the cell and you remove it out. So essentially you've come across neurotransmitter GCSE, And all calcium does is it almost knocks on the cell and says, hey, release some neurotransmitters. And what the cell does is it does exocytosis and it releases all of those neurotransmitters that it has inside of it, so that the neurotransmitters reach the synapse and you get a transmission going from one neuron to the other. So that's nervous transmission, and that's why calcium is so important, right? So I want you guys to remember, cation, calcium. Calcium leads to nervous impulses to be transmitted from one neuron to the other neuron, because calcium, Ca2+, allows for exocytosis to occur in the neurons. So perfect. So let me just write this down. Stimulates exocytosis, so exocytosis of neurotransmitter. Okay, perfect. So that's what our Ca2+ does. It stimulates the exocytosis of neurotransmitters. Okay, perfect. So we've got our first one set. Now, what about the others? There's got to be more. And you'd be right about that. The next one that we want to cover is our all and loving Na+. Let's get a different color, actually. Let's go with purple. So what we're going to talk about is sodium, which is Na+. Okay, let's use a brighter color maybe. Okay. Now, what's the use of Na+? Now, that's another question. Well, you can say the same use, to be honest, right? Because with Na+, we can have nervous transmission. And because in our neurons, essentially, if I draw a neuron like this, again, you'll come across this a lot more when you go over the nervous chapter. Essentially, you've got channels. Okay, you've got a lot of channels. And all I want you guys to just think about, and please don't confuse yourself here, right? Your sodium will allow for electrical charge to pass through your neuron. That's it. That's all you need to know. Don't care about anything else for now. So what does sodium do? Allows for nervous, electrical impulse to travel down the neuron. So your Na+ allows for the electrical charge to pass down your neuron. And that's one of the functions of Na+. Now, the other function that you need to know about, and I think a lot of students just skip over this or brush past it, is that it allows for kidney function. Okay. Again, at this stage, you don't need to know how or why or what it does in your kidneys. That's something that you'll come across later on in the course, probably more into year 13 or late year 12. So currently, all I want you guys to remember is for sodium, sodium allows for nerve impulses to pass through your neuron, okay? And it also allows for kidney function to take place. Perfect. I know it's a lot to take in, okay? Now, the next ion that we need to know according to the specification for OCR is potassium. Now, with potassium, there isn't too much that we need to really know for humans. So I'll just write it down here. You don't need to know too much depth, because you'll cover potassium in a lot more detail when you're at the nervous chapter. Okay, so for potassium, again, nervous impulse transmission, helps with nervous impulse. Helps for nervous impulse transmission. And it also, if you want to be a bit more extra and want to, in your exam questions, go in a bit more depth, you can say, helps with resting potential. So your potassium, K+, it helps to maintain a resting potential, which is negative in your cell, for example, in a neuron, right? But that's something that's quite extra. You're unlikely to really get marks in year 12 for this, but in your actual A-levels, this can sometimes afford a mark for you. So that's something that could be worth mentioning. Now, the final cation that I need you guys to remember as per OCR is hydrogen ions. So you see, we've come across hydrogen ions so many times. Now, okay, let's go about it like this, okay? So I'll come down here, okay? So we've got hydrogen ions. Hydrogen ions. So these are H+ ions. Now, what is the function of hydrogen ions? So if you guys recall back to chemistry, A-level chemistry, or even GCSE chemistry for the matter of the fact, we know that H+ ions help with pH. They allow for things to be more acidic or more alkali, depending on their concentration, right? So the more H+ ions you have, the more acidic something is. Well, wait a second. We know at GCSE that acidity or alkalinity will affect how an enzyme will function. In other words, a certain enzyme might be in an acidic environment and be like, oh my god, I'm not going to function. But another might find that, yes, this is my favorite pH. So your H+ ion concentration will decide which enzyme is really able to do something at its full potential or not allow anything to happen for that enzyme. But again, you'll cover this a lot more in the enzymes chapter, which you should be covering next, I believe. So what I need you guys to remember is H+ ions dictate pH, and pH dictates enzyme activity. Okay, so what can we say? Hydrogen ions, why they're important for the body, is because help to maintain optimum pH conditions for enzymes. Perfect. So we've covered all of the cations you really need to know for your A-level biology cations, so the positively charged ions. Perfect. So let's just recap these and then we'll move on to the anions. Feel free to skip this part if you're completely comfortable with this, okay? So cations, the ones that we need to know: calcium, sodium, potassium, and hydrogen. With calcium, calcium allows for exocytosis to occur in neurons. Because it allows for exocytosis to occur, it allows for neurotransmitters to enter the synapse and allows for the nerve impulse to jump from one neuron to the next neuron. Simple as that, okay? If you're not getting that, it's fine. We'll understand this later on in the nervous chapter. All you need to remember here for calcium is it allows nervous transmission. And you know, the easy thing is all of these, except or avoid hydrogen, all of the others allow nervous transmission. So can't think of anything, right? You know these are the ions that come up. You can say nervous transmission. It's fine. It's a safe option to say. Okay. Now, calcium, of course, with bone development, etc. That's always a given. That I still prefer to give this because this is more of an A-level thing, because that's something that you've learned in the specification. So for marks, you really want to put something like this down. Okay. Now the next one, we've got sodium. Now, what does sodium do? Two functions that ideally you want to remember. The first function is it allows for the actual charge to pass through the neuron, okay? It allows it to pass through the neuron. Now, the second function that I need you guys to remember is it allows for kidney function, okay? Neither do I need you to go into too much depth for kidney function nor for nervous transmission right now, because you'll cover this in later chapters, okay? Next one, we've got potassium. Now, potassium, I want it to be brief, simple, helps with nervous transmission. Okay? As simple as that. If you want to spice things up, you can say it helps to maintain a negative resting potential in neurons, but that's just extra information not needed at this current stage, okay? Now, the final ion that I need you to remember, a cation I need you to remember, is the hydrogen ion, so H plus ions. Now, H plus ions allow for optimum conditions to be maintained for enzymes. So, for different enzymes, different pH required. H plus concentration dictates pH. If H plus ion concentration dictates pH, then that means your H plus ions dictate the activity of enzymes. As simple as that, okay? Those are all of your cations covered. Now I'm going to flip the anions, okay? So for anions, the ones that we need to know are, let's go with the first ones. Anions here. Okay? Now the first anion that we need to know is the nitrate anion, okay? So with the nitrate anion, let's put that here, so NO3. Now you need to remember, biology is not just about humans. We've got plants. We've got plants as well. Now I want you to go back to, rewind and just go back to your GCSE biology. Where were nitrates present? Okay, or where were we taking nitrates up from for plants? Okay, root hair cells, the roots, right? You see, so plants are taking all of these nitrates in. They're taking these mineral ions in. Now, nitrates are very key for plants because nitrates allow for plants to create protein, right? Synthesize protein, which they can then use to build further tissues, okay? So nitrates, I need you guys to remember, is for synthesis. Synthesis of proteins in plants, okay? As simple as that, okay? Now, the one thing to bear in mind, where do these come from? Taken up by root hair cells in the roots through the soil. Okay, taken up by root hair cells in the roots through the soil. As simple as that. Don't complicate life up. Don't waffle. This is all you need to know. Nitrate ions, what's the function in plants? Nitrate ions help for the synthesis of proteins in plants, taken up by the root hair cells in the roots from the soil. As simple as that. Cut it off there. Next one. Next anion, i.e. negative ion. Look at that. The next one is something known as a carbonate, hydrogen carbonate ion, okay? So HCO3 minus. HCO3 minus ion. Now, this is personally one of my favorite negative ions. Now, I won't really go into too much of what exactly it does because that would be more to do with gas exchange in that chapter. And I think it would be best to leave it till there. But I'll go over it a bit briefly in the sense that all you need to know about this currently is it helps with the maintenance of blood pH levels during the transport of CO2 in the blood. Okay, so HCO3 minus ions, all you need to know for now is it helps with the maintenance of blood pH whilst CO2 is being transported in the blood, okay? Not in the RBC, we're not talking about that, we're saying in the actual blood. And although the RBC is involved, but I don't want you guys to get too complicated too soon right now, okay? Just remember this, simple. Next ion that we need to memorize almost is your chloride ion. Now, this is something that comes up so often in chemistry, chloride ions. So, what about in bio? Where are they? So in bio, what these do is there's something known as the chloride shift. So for now, again, you need to memorize this. When you go over the gaseous exchange chapter, that's when you'll realize what I really mean by these terms. But they essentially allow for charge to be balanced, okay? And this balancing of charge is known as chloride shift. Okay, yeah, and that's essentially when, okay, to be brief, if you've got your RBC here, essentially what will happen is if it suddenly becomes, let's say, positively charged, okay, becomes very positively charged, your negative ions are like, whoa, that's not right. Okay, we can't be having this. So what do? They just shoot in there and they help balancing the charge, or they help maintaining the charge. Okay, so it's essentially helping to maintain charge. Okay, so chloride shift in the blood during CO2 transport. Perfect. So that's chloride shift. Now the next ion that I need you guys to remember are phosphate ions. Now phosphate ions you will come over so much during lipids, during your cell membrane chapter. So it's important to just recognize how a phosphate ion looks. So phosphate ion, PO3 minus. And if I haven't been clear enough, you guys need to know all of these. You need to be able to write these down, including the charges, okay? So 3 minus. Okay, right, so now what's the function of this guy? Now the function of him, just two things we need to know, okay? Now you've come across one of these a lot, okay? Think, ACP. What does ATP stand for? Adenosine triphosphate, okay? Triphosphate, i.e. this guy, this dude here, right? So what does this guy do? So essentially, it's part of ATP, because that's essentially what the name stands for itself. So ATP, i.e. adenosine triphosphate. I.E. your phosphates are part of your ATP. Simple. Phosphate, part of ATP. We're good to go. Next function of your phosphates. Well, the next function of your phosphates is essentially they are part of your cell membrane. Okay? We won't go into why currently, but just memorize that for now. Those are your phosphates. Now the final anion that you need to know off by heart is your hydroxide ion, OH minus ion. Now what's interesting with the OH minus ion, it's almost complementary to your H plus ion, because your OH ions allow for pH determination to go. Because we know the more OH minus ions are present, the more alkaline your actual solution. In other words, the pH depends on the OH minus concentration, which means that OH minus dictates your enzyme activity as well. So OH minus is to do with your enzyme activity. Enzyme activity is controlled. Concentration of OH minus ions. Okay, so these are all of your anions that you need to know. So let's just go over them once more and then we should be done for ions. So nitrate ions, plants, allow for synthesis of proteins in plants. They're taken up by the root hair cells in the roots from the soil. HCO3 minus, hydrogen carbonate ion, helps with the maintenance of blood pH levels during the transport of CO2 in the blood. You will learn more about this in the gas exchange chapter. No need to worry. Chloride ion, Cl minus, allows for chloride shift to occur, hence allows for charge to be balanced. Okay? Learn more in the gas exchange chapter. You need to memorize this for now. Your phosphate ions, PO3 minus, part of ATP, as it's on the cover, adenosine triphosphate, hence part of ATP. This phosphate is part of ATP. That's it, one function of it. The other function is that it's part of your cell membranes. No need to know why, just remember it for now. We'll come back to it later. Final one, you've got your OH minus ion, hydroxide ion. What is it doing? It helps with maintenance of pH. Just remember H plus, the brothers OH minus. You can say one of them is the dark brother, the dark side in that sense, and one's on the good side. That's just one way of remembering it. So it allows for your enzyme activity to occur, essentially. Okay, your enzyme activity is controlled by OH minus ions. So we've covered all of these ions, but what about in exams? What's the application? Well, there's a lot of different ways that they can ask it. The most straightforward is just tell me what the different ions in your body are and give some examples. For examples, you really need to know these, right? And I'll be honest, by the end of the A-Level spec you've covered, because you've covered other chapters which require these ions anyways, you probably will know them off by heart at that point. So it's not a major worry. But for now, for doing, for example, termly tests or for your predicted grades, you probably haven't covered all of the specs. So you probably haven't covered some of the chapters that these ions are included in. So it's probably prudent to just go over these ions and just have a familiarity with what they are and what some examples of them are. Another way that these can actually be used is, for example, someone's got, let's say, a certain disease or a condition and they've got the symptoms listed out. And this was something that came up in the A-Level 2023 papers, which I sat myself. So in that, the symptoms of the patient was given and you were asked to think of which ion could it be, right? What abnormal levels of a certain ion, what's the problem with that, right? And that's where the application of biology comes in, because you know what the functions of these different ions are. So you think, okay, let's take an example for a second, okay? Let's go to, let's say, okay, you've got sodium, right? Okay, sodium. Now let's say, okay, we've got a patient, right? We've got a patient who's come in, and that patient is suffering from a kidney condition, right? Urine problem, right? The levels of certain stuff in the urine is abnormal, and also they are suffering from confusion, are not able to move their hands and limbs freely, and are struggling to move. So what do you think there could be a lack of? Now I want you to, I know it's quite an easy answer, but I need you to go back and just think, right? Think, okay, so different ions, I've got, first ion I think about, potassium. Potassium helps with nervous function. Okay, she's got confusion, could be the answer. But wait a minute, there's another symptom there. It's something to do with kidneys. Is potassium related to kidneys? No. Think about calcium. Calcium related to nervous? Yes. Related to kidneys? No. What's the next one? H plus? H plus, could that be related to kidneys? Maybe, because it's to do something with enzymes. Maybe it's something to do with that. But what about the nervous bit? Related to nervous, H plus ions? No. So eliminate H plus ions. The last ion that we're left with is sodium. I don't want you to write that answer straight down. I want you to think. Sodium ions. Sodium ions related to nervous function? Yes, tick. What about kidney function? We know that they're related to kidney function. Tick. We got our answer. So with the application questions, a lot of people will just jump onto the exam questions. Don't do that. I want you to know the content and understand it. Right? I want you to remember it should be on your tips, so you're able to apply that content when you need to. Right? You can't do exam questions and learn mark schemes to get that. You need to know what you need to know, and then you can apply it as much as you want. Well, I hope that was helpful and you're able to understand all of these different ions for OCR A-Level biology. Hope that was helpful. Keep inquisitive and keep learning. Thank you.